Hi guys, today we're going to be taking notes on Objective 2.2c. Our topic for today is solving quadratics using complete the square when a equals 1. Your instructional objective today is a very basic one. I'm not asking you to master this process yet. Excuse me. I'm just asking that you start the practice. Okay. Sorry, I had a little tickle in my throat. So that's our instructional objective. So let's begin. So we're going to start in the first box of our notes, creating perfect square trinomials. So we're solving quadratic equations, and we've already solved them by factoring, and we've solved them by completing the square. Using the square root property. Now, both of those work really well, but they don't always work. But completing the square, which is the least elegant of the four methods that you can use to solve a quadratic equation, requires you to be able to factor and still use the square root property. So we're just going to practice by first learning how to create a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, what I'm trying to create is one of those trinomials that'll factor into a quantity square. That's what we're doing. So to do that, what we do is we focus on the b term. And what we do is we cut the b term in half. And then we square it. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. And 3 squared is 9. So we are going to add 9 to this binomial to create a perfect square trinomial. And then we're going to factor it. Since the first numbers and the last numbers are perfect squares, we can factor it to x plus 3 quantity squared. So what we did was we created a perfect square trinomial that we could factor out. So let's try another one. Here we have x squared minus 18x. Again, we're trying to create a perfect square trinomial. So we cut the middle term, or the b term, in half. Or excuse me, just b, not the b term, just b. Cut it in half. That's negative 9. And then we square. Negative 9 squared is positive 81. So we've just created a perfect square trinomial, which we can now factor. It's not plus, into a perfect square. Okay, so I'm getting this term, which is kind of a little cheat, but it's not really. From when I cut the b term, the b in half, that's the number that we use when we factor out our perfect square trinomial. So let's take this next one. So those were even b's. This one's an odd b. So when we go to cut it in half and square it, well, we get a fraction. Okay, so 5 cut in half is 5 halves, and we square it. That'd be 25 fourths. And now we have not a very fun perfect square trinomial, but a perfect square trinomial. What we're going to do now is we're going to factor it out into its perfect squares. And there you have it. X plus 5 halves quantity squared will give us this answer. Okay? All right, I'm going to move the screen down or up. Let me do that. Get these last 3 done. Okay, so now we're going to create some more perfect square trinomials. So we have another b that is odd. So what we're going to do is cut it in half and square it. And when we square it, we get a positive 121 over 4. And then we factor it. And we get x minus 11 halves quantity squared. All right, now we have the fraction b, which is a little bit more frustrating because you have to cut a fraction in half. To do that, a lot of times what we'll do is just multiply it times half. And when we do that, we get 1/3. So 1/3 squared is the number that's going to go here, and that would be 1/9. Come over here and open it up and factor it out. X plus 1/3 quantity squared will give us the perfect square of that trinomial. Last problem, we're going to take -1/5 and multiply it times, I'm just going to back that up and clean it up. -1/5 times half, that gives us -1/10, and we're going to square it. So that gives us +1/100th, and then we factor it. X minus 1/10 quantity squared. So we've created perfect square trinomials and then factored them as squares. Okay, all right. Let's move on to the next box over here and fill in the blanks for the steps. Okay, here we go. Solving quadratic equation by completing the square. Step 1, we're going to add when we start solving problems that where a is not 1. Step 2, you're going to write the equation in this form. X squared plus bx equals c. So we're going to move the constant out of the way if we have one. We're going to make a space for completing the square. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a perfect square trinomial by cutting b in half and squaring the results. And then we're going to add the number found to both sides of the equation to maintain balance. So that's the step 3. And usually when people make mistakes, it's right here. They'll add the number that's found to one side and forget to add it to the other side. And then the next step is to factor the perfect square trinomial. Factor the perfect square trinomial. I'm just going to use it capital letters there, and combine like terms. This is important to remember as well. Last step is to apply the square root property to solve the equation. Okay, so I'm going to put this on pause for a moment. The bell's about to ring. It's going to be loud. I'll be back later.